here at Nebraska Wesleyan. My mom was a sandhiller. She was from out by Stapleton. My dad grew up in Lincoln, and they met here during their time at Wesleyan. In fact, my mother, during her time, she was the assistant to the student assistant to the president.
Is that
So
right?
she spent a lot of time over in Old Main, and my dad was usually getting in trouble on campus. Thank you. And about our family really is living the American dream, because we grew up starting a business and continue to run that business today. It is humbled our beginnings though, because my dad started our business right upon graduating from Wesleyan. He was trained to be a teacher. He was going to be an industrial arts teacher. And he realized upon graduation, he was going to have to take a pay cut. Because during college, he was racing, making money, selling cars, making money. And he thought, wow, do I really want to get into teaching when I can actually start a business? And so that's what he did. So in the early days, he was racing in the 30s and 40s and 50s. And then effectively, upon graduation, opened a speed shop, which is the building on the lower right, on 2131 O Street. When you think about it, that building is 20 by 20. It's about the size of this room. Well, if you look at the facilities we have now, we have millions of square feet that we manage. So it's really interesting to know that you can start from a vision and humble beginnings and really make a big difference. This was the speed shop in the early days. There's my dad behind the counter, and most important, his business partner, my mother. She was the enabler in the sense that she had great business instincts. She was in charge of all the accounting and finance. She was in charge of human resources. My dad never read a balance sheet until he was 40. But he would say to Joyce, can we do this? Can we afford to do this? How do we do this? And Joyce would have a lot of the background answers to know, yes, we can do that and move forward. My dad was a brilliant marketer, and together the two of them are in over 10 industry Hall of Fames around the United States. So this was the speed shop when we moved over to 1719 N Street, selling performance cars and performance parts. And in the 50s, they really engaged in racing. And that's how the business grew, because they had a local speed shop selling to local customers. So this is going to be a business evolution that proves what you need to know in life is it's not the survival of the fittest. It's the survival of the fastest to change. So we're a retailer back in the 60s. Our customers were at the U.S. Air Base here in Lincoln, the U.S. Army Air Corps. They closed the base in '64. Those guys had an infinite amount of money, and they all were interested in racing. The base commander would recruit members of their team based on their interest in racing. And so they were racing, drag racing on the airstrip on the weekends, but they closed the base and all their customers went away. So the question became, how do we survive? Because we didn't have enough business to support our business. And what they started to do, and this is when my brothers and I got engaged in the business, because we were part of the collating team. We'd make catalogs when we were kids. We'd march around the dining room table and we'd staple at the end. So we actually ended up with a lot of good eye-hand coordination because of our assembly skills. And so my dad would go off racing, and my mom would always ask him when he got back, not did you win, how many orders did you take? And so effectively we pivoted in the 60s and throughout the 70s into a mail order catalog. I'll pass a couple of these. And so the catalog business was the first pivot out of a retail business. So what it allowed us, it was a new communication tool that allowed us to reach a larger audience from a local location. And that served us well and still does serve us well. I mean, at one point in time, we did over 10 million catalogs a year. Now we're reallocating those marketing dollars to communicate with our customers in a different way, and we'll get into that. But in the 70s and 80s, my dad was engaged in racing, and they were winning. They were nationally significant. They won national championships, and they were racing in sprint cars. They were racing in drag racing. They were racing at Bonneville. They were racing at Indy cars. And then he retired, and my brothers and I ended up taking over. And so this is when you start moving into the next generation. So my brothers and I raced Pikes Peak, Indy cars, Bonneville, and IMCA as well. In 2001, we moved into our new building. which you can see on the picture here. So this is in West Lincoln, just west of the Haymarket. And it was a great move for us because it's a giant facility. It's over 300,000 square feet. And we basically filled it up and used that as our corporate headquarters. This is our family, 3 good-looking brothers and myself and my parents. We all have different skill sets. And part of the mantra for the family is that before you come back, you have to go get relevant experience so that when you come back, you actually can make a difference. And in my case, I grew up in Lincoln, swam at Nebraska my freshman year, decided I didn't want to do that for the rest of my college career, and I transferred to Stanford University. And I got my economics degree at Stanford, and then got my master's in engineering management at Stanford Business School. And so I worked in New York for about 4 years, 3 years during college as interns, and then 4 years for a consulting firm called Booz Allen and Hamilton. So my clients were corporate 100 clients. So General Electric, GTE, Sprint, Allied Signal, American Can, Timex, big corporations with really hard problems. But for a graduate, it was the perfect job. I had a chance to test a lot of industries, a lot of different segments of a company, and was exposed to a lot of really smart people. After leaving New York, I moved to San Francisco. And in San Francisco, I became an investment banker with a firm called Hellman and Friedman. And that was a small venture firm in San Francisco. The founders were really quite infamous in the industry. Warren had been the president of Lehman Brothers in New York. There were only 5 of us in the firm. So that's the firm, 5 guys. And Warren was the president of Lehman Brothers, and he was a partner at Lehman at the age of 26. So he was a hurricane. He actually partnered with Tully Friedman, who ran the West Coast operation for Salomon Brothers. Well, how in the world did I get there? Well, I had some good job offers when I was leaving New York. And when I had a chance to work for Warren Buffett and David Murdoch in LA and Warren Hellman. But my connectivity to Warren Hellman was interesting because when I was at Stanford, I was a teaching assistant at the Graduate School of Business. And one of the students and I became connected. And it turns out that his parents were from Lincoln. They actually were best friends with my neighbors growing up. And so I made that personal connection. And the message here for all of you is try things in your comfort zone, out of your comfort zone. You'll learn what you like. More importantly, sometimes you learn what you don't like. And it'll help guide you in finding the perfect place for you to spend your time in your career. Well, Matt, when I told Matt I was actually looking for a job, he said, come join us. Well, it's funny because I joined, the day I joined, there was another guy that joined, Tom Steyer. You probably remember that name. He ran for president this last cycle. I think he spent, I don't know, $60 million on his own campaign. Anyway, we were a small group. We were corporate advisors to companies like Hewlett Packard, American President's Line, McKesson. We did tender defense work. We kept Federated Department Stores public, and we bought Levi Strauss as an LBO. So it was a fascinating learning period for me. And then my family recruited me to come back to the family business, which I'm very glad to do. My brothers had very similar experiences. My oldest brother is ME. He worked at Caterpillar and he worked at Procter & Gamble. He was the youngest engineer to be at Procter & Gamble. So when we all ended up back in Lincoln, we had a mighty team. And more importantly, all the oars are in the water and they're all rowing in the same direction. And in family business, that's really critical to keep everybody on the team. So what drives our business today? Well, it's the customer, of course. We need to be where the customer wants us to be. And, in the old days, it was in a catalog. They would look for us in the mailbox, and then they would call us and say, I need help, and we'd help them with their service. Well, starting in the early 2000s, that changed to be digital. And today, over 80% of our business is done digitally. But what's interesting about our business is that we have always taken control of the mission critical elements of our business. Historically, there are a lot of advertising agencies that help companies create marketing and communication and advertising plans. We brought that in-house because we needed to be the experts. We didn't need to hire an expert. And you needed to have that reboot. Every time you did a catalog, you needed to work on your prior knowledge rather than try to train somebody on what you did last time. Same thing with software. Our software services, we actually put them in 1988 was our first software package. And I joke with friends of mine that we're really not a speed shop or a merchant. We're really a software company masquerading as a speed shop because we write all our own code. We've written our own websites. We have all of our own digital interfaces. And we've got a team that does that. And why is that important? It makes us unique. It also makes us authentic because we can give the message we want to give, not a package message that someone else gives. And from an operations perspective, it becomes really complicated, and I'll get into that, of how owning your own software allows you to do things that no one else, and I mean no one else can do. So what happened this last year? Well, we went through this thing called COVID. Well, this scatter chart here kind of says what happened to a lot of businesses. Well, a lot of businesses that were retail and facing were basically put out of business. They lost all their sales, airlines, movie theaters for some short period of time. But the world of e-commerce and digital, it became an accelerator. So as a result, our business really grew. And it's amazing what happens when you tell people to stay home and you send them thousands of dollars. It's amazing what they'll spend it on. And so they had these projects in their garage that they had always wanted to work on. They never got to that old car that they were going to work on with their dad or their granddad. Well, now they had the time, and more importantly, they had the money. And so our business rocketed during this digital transformation. But it also changed us because we went away from this catalog business where it was about 50-50, now that we're almost all in an entirely digital platform. The other thing is to be prepared. And that's an important message in life and also in business. Well, we had already tested remote work because we have remote workers in other states. And we had always had enough software and hardware assets that we could actually redeploy them. And so when we were forced to go remote, we had to make the decision, how do we run our business? And it really became apparent that the most critical people at that COVID point of time were our warehouse workers and our manufacturing workers, because they can't get sick. If they get sick and shut down our warehouse, we're out of business. Yes, we can send the call center and the office folks home, the marketing folks home, the IT folks home, but you can't send the warehouse home. And so effectively, we geared our entire COVID response around trying to protect those employees. You know, we had testing at the door coming in. We put people in pods. They had a small group that they would work with. They'd have a small group they would take breaks with. They were restricted to specific bathrooms. I mean, it was really over the top. Fortunately, my director of operations is a career naval officer. He has a master's in nuclear engineering. And so he was the commander of the USS Kidd, and he knew how to manage and lead teams of men and women. And so we were fortunate that we made it through that. And at the time, you know, the employees were pushing back saying, wow, this is awful. This is awful over the top. But when we got to our first performance review at the end of that year, we had our best internal review ever. People were appreciative. You know, we cared for them like we cared for our family, and they recognized that. And that really makes a difference. And that's part of being in the family business. The other thing, it starts with strategy. We had, before the COVID, in 2019, we built a new facility in Arizona, because it really became apparent that we needed to be closer to our customers, because we had our distribution center here in Lincoln. And so we wanted to serve our best market, which was California, faster. And so we had proved up over that first year of 2019 that we could build a facility, staff it, and be successful in getting one-day delivery to Arizona and Southern California. Perfect. We're trained. We know what we need to do. So the strategy was that we need to do this again in other parts of the country. So COVID hits, we make the decision we need to move east at the height of COVID. Okay, everyone else is looking for a bunker and a hole to crawl into. You know, we were up there saying, okay, we need a DC east, and we made the decision on August 28th. I found the facility because we're in the real estate business. We know how to do that. I found a facility. We toured it on September 29th. We closed on December 9th, and we shipped on December 31st. It's a big facility. It's 300,000 square feet. So this is as big as our facility here in Lincoln. But it was acting bold at a tough time. And that's a really important message, is that if you have your strategy right, This was an opportunity. It really wasn't, the world was ending. The world was really just beginning for us. Today, I couldn't buy this facility. It wouldn't be available. And if it was available, it'd probably be 3 times the cost of what we paid. So now we have a distribution center on the East Coast where the largest population is. And it really makes a difference for our delivery, which you'll see here in a second. The other epiphany we had as we started to sell on eBay and on Amazon and on Walmart is that brands make a difference. If you own your brand, you can control pricing. And if you can control pricing, you can control margins. If you're buy sell, you really have to, you're swinging against pitches against the lowest seller in the marketplace. Well, your margins are going to get killed. So these are brands that we've actually acquired over the time. And some of these we actually acquired in the recession of 08, like AFCO, our biggest division. So in AFCO, we make radiators, we make shock absorbers, we make suspension equipment and testing equipment. And then we bought through AFCO DeWitt's and Longacre. So we have manufacturing facilities in Indiana, Michigan, South Dakota, and then we have 5 facilities here in Lincoln. But again, AFCO was bought at the height of the Great Recession. Bold moves in tough times because the opportunity's there and the value's there. We also had this idea that we needed to act with people first, with the idea of let's protect our people. And Speedway acted as a 3PL, which means we fulfilled the products for other divisions when COVID hit. And we were able to do that because Michigan and Indiana, their governors shut down the states. And unlike Nebraska, they were forced to send their staff home. Michigan, automotive parts were not considered an essential business. That was the only state in the country other than Indiana, which reversed their ruling. But what did we do? We retained 100% of the staff through all of that. And we also repositioned all that inventory so their customers were served not from Indiana or Michigan, but from Lincoln. And then we talked about this a little bit. We actually own all the differentiating functions. So internal control, the e-commerce platforms, and it's really important because they really make it scalable. So how do you engage with customers today? Well, you guys know. I mean, you're all over social media. You know how people communicate with you. Well, we do the same thing. And I want to share a little bit how we do that. So we'll do it by going to trade shows, old-fashioned ways, sending catalogs, old-fashioned ways, but also digitally. So we're on all the social sites. We post a lot of videos almost weekly in YouTube and our YouTube channels. And then we partner with television shows so that we get lots of touches and eyeballs on the brand through time. And we actually try to move from being a retailer to being a resource, working with our customers so we can help them solve a problem rather than just sell them parts. And then you have to become an expert. We've gotten through Google's platform and we have so many postings there, we become recognized as a subject matter expert. And as a result of that, we'll drive 1.5 million visits to our websites a year because we're an expert. And there's a lot of technical ways that you make that happen. But that's one of those wins that when you win, you can win again, and it actually accelerates your brand. But the other thing about the social engine is the search engines is that it's a dynamic marketplace, and what worked yesterday won't work tomorrow because Google will change the rules. Thinking back to 3 years ago, we sell 200,000 different products. Okay, that's a long tail. Okay, we could serve up to Google 30 million different pages. Okay, what we found is initially that was good. Google would actually search all of them and they'd reference them and we'd actually sell off those pages. But then later they changed their algorithm and it basically prioritized, and they'd stop, their spiders had stopped searching after a while. And so you quickly realized that the rules had changed and we needed to pivot to change with the rules. So now we have about 1/3 of that number of pages because they'll actually be searched by Google. But search engine optimization, this is the magic part of the game, because if you can get content that's relevant, you get ratings that are high, so you're on the first page of search, that's free. And that's nice, because that's cheap. Because the next alternative I'll show you here is paid search. But we also engage with the customers. So we'll send out 65 million emails a year. That's a lot of touches. And then we also send out 9 million text messages to our customers. And so the challenge here is how to write meaningful content, communicate with what they're interested in, and not over communicate, because we all get spam. We know how distasteful that is if somebody over communicates. And so part of the challenge is that you have to create a unique profile for every customer and potential customer. So if you're working on a Mustang, you don't want to see Camaro parts. You only want to see Mustang parts. So that's part of the magic, is that you have to tailor your communication so it's relevant to the customer. And this is the expensive part. So we connect through Google AdWords. We have 700,000 keyword combinations that we search for and have out on Google every day, and we're paying for it. It has 800 different campaigns that are running simultaneously. Well, does it work? Yeah. I mean, we've generated 2 billion impressions and over 20 million clicks. The sad thing is that you had to pay for all that. So your bias is, let's create the content so the customers can find us organically versus have to be paid to be in the shopping cart or in the search bar at the top. But we have a team, and COVID's actually really helped us with this, because our team that does this is young, and they decided they wanted to move. A couple of them wanted to move to Nevada. Well, they could work from Nevada and work for us. And another one moved to Florida, and then it was so nice in Florida, the other two moved back to Florida. So, most of my team that's doing this, they've been doing it for almost 10 years, but they're remote, and we're happy and they're happy. And then you have to be where the customers are. So you have to connect with customers where they are shopping, and it might be Amazon, it might be eBay, it might be Walmart. And our challenge is if we can capture them there, we need to convert them into Speedway customers. So when they come back to us, they know where we are on our websites and visit us there. As you can see, we use all the different search engines and marketplaces. And this was really important during COVID. We've always had this mantra that you can't sell from an empty wagon. Well, from our perspective, we always had a lot of inventory. With that many SKUs, I'm proud to say that historically we would have close to 98.5% line item fill rate. So that means if you were ordering this cup of warm coffee, 99% of the time, the store would have it. So you're going to be happy. And our job is to ship it the same day you order it. So through COVID, sure, we had challenges with our supply chain, but because we had a lot of inventory, we were able to grow our sales because we had product. I mean, at one point in time, we had 95 containers on the water backed up out of Long Beach during COVID. That's a lot of parts on the water waiting. But fortunately, we were prepared. And the other thing is that we own our own manufacturing and our own supply chain and our own distribution. So we do all of this in-house. And that really makes a difference, because you can tailor it to what you want to have happen and also what the customer wants you to do for them. This is our main facility in Lincoln. As I mentioned, we've got multiple manufacturing plants in Lincoln, manufacturing fiberglass and engine shock performance center, and also a chassis shop. We have DCs in Tucson, Arizona, and Carneysville, West Virginia, and then manufacturing Boonville, Indiana, and Wixom and Sturgis. So complicated business, lots of different locations, but that's what it takes, because this is the magic right here. With 3 DCs, that's not a lot. I can cover 50% of the United States of our customers with next day service, and I can get 98% within 2 days. Well, that's relevant, because the customers know we have it. And if they place an order, our internal systems are such that the product between they place the order on the website, it can take less than 40 minutes to be picked, packed, shipped, verified, and on a truck. So that's real time. So when the customer orders, we know where they are, we know where our parts are, we know which DC it's coming out of, and we know which trailer it's going on. And so we can tell them specifically, you're going to get it tomorrow or the next, we can give them the time in transit, live, real time. And we were told UPS has been changing with their accessorial charts, saying if you have rural delivery, they change some of their costs. And our system is dynamic. And so they change their cost structure. We input the data. The next day, packages routed differently. And all of a sudden, the purple trucks were full and the UPS trucks weren't. The guys called us 2 days later and said, what happened? I said, you guys know what happened. You changed your rate chart. You're not the low cost or best provider for us. Well, guess what happened? They changed their charts for us back. We got discounts. But so our system is so dynamic. So we'll send a truck every day, a semi to Kansas City. We'll send trucks to Des Moines. And as a result, that's a huge one-day map out of Lincoln. So I can get to Kansas City. I can get all the way to the Canadian border. I can get past Chicago and all the way to Denver. So it's really a good place for us to physically be. So when you go back and look at some of the periodicals from the early days, there's a publication called Speed Merchant in 1954. Well, they had a list of the 300 speed shops that were in America. We were proudly listed in Lincoln, Nebraska. And today we're the only one on that list that survived. Well, how could that be? Well, there's a lot of things that are necessary to make a business transition from one generation to the next. First of all, you have to have a team that's passionate. You have to have a talented team. You have to have experience. You have to pivot in the marketplace at the right time. Like when we moved from a retailer to mail order and mail order to digital, you had to make those transitions. And you also had to have a skilled team that was capable of making that transition for you. We've always had the idea that you needed to ship the same day and offer quick delivery. We survey the customer every time we send an order out. We survey the customer and ask them about their experience. And you get those surveys. I mean, you know what that's like. But how many times does somebody call you? If you've had a bad experience, you tell them. We call every one of our customers, if we've had a poor experience, to talk through it with them and try to make it right. Well, that connectivity is unique. And so customers become hugely loyal as a result. And we try to improve the processes internally. So what does being in a speed shop allow us to do? Well, it's allowed us to invest in other things. And a lot of these investments are really for the betterment of the community. So we've actually partnered with my good friend, Mike Dunlap, in real estate investments, and I'll show you some pictures of some of the things we've done there. So we've invested in real estate, both in Lincoln, Omaha, but also in Fargo, North Dakota. The governor of North Dakota is a good friend of mine. Again, friends, connectivity. He was at Stanford when I was there. He started this little company called Great Plains Software that sold to Microsoft in the 1990s for $1 billion. And so he started a venture firm. Well, we invested in a lot of his ventures, and that's really been good for us. But we've also invested in local ventures. Like I'm on the board of Huddle, and we've been an investor in Huddle since its inception. We've been their only landlord. Every time the founders needed more space, I solved the problem for them. I told them early on, they didn't need to know every business. They needed to know their business, the software business. They didn't need to know the real estate business. I'm here to help them. And basically, we probably wrote a half dozen or 8 leases. I don't think they ever finished one yet, but it was because they needed more space and we'd move them to where they needed to be. We run the co-working space downtown, the Fuse co-working space. I'm also invested in Allo because of Nelnet, our partnership, and also in Calamar, which is Nebraska, led by a Nebraskan, and Cafe Nero. Well, how in the world am I invested in Cafe Nero? Has anybody ever been to a Cafe Nero? It's the largest coffee shop in the UK and Europe. Okay, so how did Clay get invested in a European coffee chain? Well, one of my good friends, when I transferred to Stanford, transferred from Brown. He was the starting quarterback for Brown, and he transferred to Stanford, and he would have played at Stanford, but there was this young kid, John Elway. Yeah, John Elway was there. And so Jerry didn't get to play there, but Jerry ended up going to graduate school at Harvard. Then he ended up at INSEAD, which is a business school in Paris. And then he got his PhD at Oxford. Well, through that world experience, he realized when he got into London, London didn't have the best of Paris. London had a pub scene, it didn't have a coffee scene. And so he started a coffee shop. Pretty heady thing for a guy from Oxford. Well, he has 1,000 of them now. He was the entrepreneur of the year for the UK in 2007, took the company public, took it private. And it's really an amazing story of how someone saw a market opportunity and took advantage of it.
I don't know if they drank tea in the UK.
Well, they drink some coffee. We got over 1,000 places they can buy it at. But part of what we were able to do is to reinvest in our hometown. So these are some of the pictures of some of the investments that we've made, some all by ourselves, others in partnership. So we're a partner in the Hilton Garden and the new Holiday Inn Express. We've saved a lot of historic buildings downtown, and that was something that we could uniquely afford to do. My older brother is really a skilled architect, and he has the vision to be able to walk into a building and see it done. And so we could take our skill set and take our financial resources and actually go do good. My mom always said it's really nice to do well, but sometimes it's better to do good. And so we were able to save a lot of buildings, both in the Haymarket. We were one of the first developers in the Haymarket. So like where the Oven is and Buzzard Billy's, all those buildings along 8th Street, many of those are our buildings as well. And so we're really proud of how we've been able to reinvest in our hometown. And the Telegraph District, as Randy said, is one of our newer ventures. And so that we did that with Nelnet. And as a team, we're uniquely capable of making these things happen. So in the middle is the Huddle building. You've got some of the Telegraph buildings. We bought the Nebraska State Patrol, which is off to the right, and the Atrium building. But when we bought the Telegraph District, I mean, that was really transformational for that part of downtown, because most of that, it was over a 20-acre site. Most of it was sitting empty. I mean, these are old buildings that were not bad buildings, that just weren't unoccupied, and they didn't really have a function. And we tried to buy 2 of them. Mike tried to buy 2 of them. Then we said, okay, we'll buy them together. We made them an offer on all 4 buildings. They wouldn't sell them to us. Why? They were still running Windstream, and they needed a place to operate out of, because they couldn't sell their facility, even though they didn't use most of it. And so now my challenge became to buy a set of buildings. I had to find a place for the tenant to move. Well, I found it. It was in one of our other buildings. Oh, we've got a tenant in there. So I had to move Prairieland Dairy out of one of my buildings into a new building. Well, I had to go buy 2 buildings to move Prairieland. So, I mean, this is just a giant checker game or a chess game. So I had to go buy 2 buildings to move a tenant, to move Windstream out so I could buy their buildings. I mean, that's crazy. I mean, who's going to do that? But we got it done with the vision, and then we were able to open the Telegraph District. And so we have 3 mixed-use buildings down there on 21st and O. And like the Mill, some of you have probably been to the Mill coffee shop. That's their #1 mill in the marketplace now. So it's amazing. We moved Allo in there. We moved Nelnet in there. And so Nelnet's call center had close to 800 people before COVID. Allo has hundreds of people. So, some of your towns that you came from, you may not have 1,000 workers. I mean, my mom's town didn't have 1,000 workers. Well, we have 1,000 workers on the corner that the mill is. Well, are they going to succeed? High probability they will. And so we're fortunate that we're able to reinvest in the community like that. And then we're also fulfilling needs of the community. On the lower left is the Canopy Park. It's just being finished now. There will be 263 new apartments down in the Haymarket. Across the street from that, we have the Canopy Market. We tried for 20 years to get a marketplace downtown. So we're meeting those needs. And again, the Huddle building allowed us to bring all of the tech talent to Nebraska and keep our tech talent in Lincoln. But we also reinvest in other ways. Has anybody been out to the Sporting Village? Yeah, so we developed that a few years ago because we knew that we were lacking sports courts in Nebraska and especially in Lincoln. So we have the turf fields outside, we have an indoor soccer pitch, and we also have indoor basketball, which can be converted to volleyball. And then we have practice facilities for volleyball. So it's really, it's a 60-acre sports complex that, again, why did we do it? We could afford to do it, and it was important for the community. It became a resource. We're in the process right now of we acquired the telephone museum as part of the Telegraph District expansion. The choice was to move it to California because there was another bidder. Well, we bought it, and we're going to actually make it part of the buildings in the Telegraph District. And this is something that I want to talk for a minute about. This is another way that we give back. This is our Museum of American Speed. And my dad started collecting objects in the 40s. We started a 501c3 in 1992. And in 2021, we were selected by USA Today as the #1 attraction for car lovers in America. Well, that's pretty heady because that's against the Ford Museum, the Indianapolis Speedway Museum, against the Peterson Museum. And so we're really proud of this. Magazines have called us the Gearhead Smithsonian. They called us the best racing museum in the country. And, it attracts some really important people to Lincoln. I mean, we had the Unser Racing Museum here just recently. We had the Peterson Museum. That's the largest museum in California. Their donor group came and spent most of last week with us. And so it really is a great attraction for the community, but also it gives us a way to give back to our industry that's been so good to our family. And we have a Hall of Fame that we can honor other segments of the industry, the Model T Club of America, the Big Car Racing, Rod and Custom Museum. And so we're in the process of a big expansion. So we have 150,000 square feet currently under roof, and we're adding another 90. So that's a big place. We're going to have 250,000 square feet of museum space. But again, as Mom said, you have to give back. And so these are all the different organizations that we've supported historically. And of course, the Prairie Wolves are on that list because we're proud. My mom was in the first class that was in Johnson Hall. And so I don't know if any of you live there now, but she said it was really nice at the time. With that, I'll open it up to questions or dialogue. Does anybody have any questions for me?
All right, questions, guys?
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to introduce myself real quick. My name's Cale Dice, and I actually used to race karts and I race micro sprints. So safe to say I've been to Speedway a few times. Have a lot of Speedway products. One question I had is during COVID, there was a lot of products that were back ordered, and I'm sure it was a really difficult time.
Yeah.
I was just wondering how you went about that, and trying to make customers happy, as well as making sure the stock was always as best as it could be during those tough times. And because I noticed things like safety equipment and then tires, all that kind of stuff was
Tires are still a problem.
Yeah,
because all the rubber has to come from abroad.
Yep. So I was just curious what your process
So-
was for that.
So we have our own manufacturing facilities, and of the products that we sell, half of them are our brands. So we have a lot of control, but it also has a lot of responsibility that you have to purchase them. A lot of the products that we manufacture are assembled in the US, so we'll buy components overseas, and that's where the problem is that for any buy-sell product, there's going to likely be something that is sourced offshore, even if it's assembled in the United States. A lot of times things are just made in total offshore. And China in particular was really challenging because you just couldn't get through the port of Long Beach. You just didn't have enough capacity to get through there. And so that was really the biggest challenge. And as a result of that, we actually pivoted internally to manufacture more of our own parts. So our facility for manufacturing here in Lincoln is now moving out to a new facility that almost is 1.5 times its size. So we've acquired all new DMG Mori, which is the machining centers. They come out of Germany. They have long lead times. I've had them on order for a year, and they're just getting delivered now. So all these supply chains have really become challenging because things work so efficiently and just-in-time work until it didn't. It just might be in sometime, not just in time. And so that was the biggest challenge that we had historically, is that you couldn't rely on your suppliers to supply. And so it forced us to either order more, order sooner, order more frequently. And all of that is basically computer driven. So we basically get the logic into the computer, and that'll help us, our purchasing agents, do the right thing. But it has been a huge, I think our industry was probably better than most, because at our worst time, our supply numbers got down to like 94%. Well, most companies, that's world-class to start with. Well, that was our worst case. But specific products, we've been out for a year and we just can't get them. Tires are just terrible. You just can't get them. And we're having trouble getting chromoly tubing to make race car chassis. You can't get the tubing. And so you can't make the product if you can't get the raw materials. So you've identified the biggest challenge in American industry is the supply chain reliance. And as the world became flat, you became more interdependent on other countries. And as long as things worked smoothly, that was great because it was efficient and it was low cost. But when things didn't go smoothly, it became high cost and late.
Okay, you have a question?
Yeah, so like with COVID, how do you guys like go about like making the decisions? Like you have like a board of people that you go to make decisions, or?
Yeah, they happened in different ways. For the internal staffing decisions, we have a management team, and that was two of my brothers, myself, and a couple of our leaders. And so we would get together and talk through with the HR team, how do we protect things? How do we protect people? And we moved to curbside pickup just so we kept people out of the building. Again, the objective one, keep our team safe, healthy, the warehouse and manufacturing. So what did that require? Keep everybody out of the building. Nobody had access to the building that wasn't working in those two departments. And so there was a team that did that. On the real estate side, it was a little bit different, because in the real estate side, I'm the general partner. And so a lot of times I take the lead and then get my team behind me to make the charge. Well, in the real estate, I shared this with Randy, that I had a good friend that serves on the New York Fed board. And so in the big recession of 09, 08, I called Ken. I've invested with him. He's been a good friend. And we just talked. And he's my canary in the coal mine. He can tell me what's going to happen before it happens to me. Well, I called him in early March when COVID was just starting to hit. And knowing his position there, he would have access to a lot more information than I would. And so we talked for about 3 hours on a Sunday. And the epiphany I had after talking with Ken was that I needed to think like a banker. He had over 600 tenants, so we have a lot of tenants. And like 250 buildings. So think like a banker. I needed to take those tenants and put them in risk groups. Who's going to pay me, who's not? And I profiled the tenants, and thinking through it, if you can't go to a retail store, they're probably not going to have a lot of sales, and without sales, they won't pay the rent. So the gyms were done, the bars were done, the restaurants were done, retailers were done, yoga studios were going to be done. And so I had 83 tenants that were going to be out of business. And I calculated how much rent they were not going to pay me. And it was a lot, but fortunately we could shoulder that. I could make it through. And so I contacted my team on Monday. So this happened over the weekend. I called my team on Monday and I said, we have 83 tenants we need to make a proposal to. We're going to proactively call these tenants and tell them that their April and May rent doesn't need to be paid. We're not forgiving it. We're going to defer it. We're going to defer it, and they can pay it when they can afford to pay it, when their customers come back. We don't know how long this is going to last, but we'll defer those two. And the motivation is that if they weren't going to pay me, they aren't going to pay me. why make them feel bad about not paying me because of the circumstances? And so we got everybody on the same payment plan. And so I didn't have to micromanage of different payment relationships. And that was fantastic because everybody's on the same program. And so my team called them up and I said, communication. Call. This isn't a text. This isn't an email. I want you to get a live person on the phone and talk to them about what's happening and telling them what we'll do to try to help, since they're tenant partners. I mean, we think of our tenants as partners because if they don't do well, we don't do well. And so they called them, and it was interesting. A third of the tenants said, my parents taught me to save for a rainy day, and it's raining. I'm okay. Thank you. I don't need the help. But another third, there were about 10 of them that our tenants effectively started crying on the phone because, that was the elephant in the room. They were out of business. And, but for our help, and that was before all the PPP and all the government support programs, we were their lifeline. But, being good Nebraska businesses, guess what happened? All 83 paid me in full. But the serendipity of it was we did the right thing. We helped people when we could because we could. And then I shared what we did with our bankers. Well, what did our bankers do? Oh, that's great that you did that, Clay. Why don't we defer your principal payments for 6 months? Yes, you have to pay interest, but you don't have to pay principal. Well, that's a great deal because if you don't have to pay the bank back, guess what? Cash flow is great. And so, we have, I think, 18 banking relationships. And if you know a banker, next time you see them, hug them, because Nebraska bankers are magic in this state because they have the resources, they're community-based, and I didn't have to go to a loan committee. They didn't have to go to a loan committee to tell me what they could do. They told me on the phone, because we were usually talking to the owner or the president of the bank. And to a bank, they all stepped forward and said, you've helped, we can help you then. And so it's funny that 2020 may have been our best cash flow year ever because I didn't get paid, but I didn't have to pay somebody. And I didn't have to pay more than I didn't get paid in rent, but it all cycled forward. But, there's some really good communication lessons there in trying to make sure you do the right thing for your customers and your tenants.
Anybody else have questions?
Yeah.
I was just curious to know, what are your biggest customer bases? If it's just individual, as far as just on the Speedway Motors side?
Yeah, so it's there's so many different segments of our industry. So there's micro racing, kart racing, there is sprint car racing, midget racing, and then IMCA racing, modifieds. So each of those have a unique product line. That's about a third of our business. The other 2/3 is antique car performance parts. So trying to make vintage cars, 32 Fords, 34 Fords, Model Ts, Model As, and then muscle cars is the biggest part of our business. So it's basically people taking an old Camaro or Mustang or a Nova and making it a performance car. So they're broken into segments like that. And then, of course, there's some things that are safety equipment related that cut across multiple racing industries. So it has a lot of unique product lines, but they're kind of overarching in this world of wheels.
I have a question about you mentioned that transition plan was very important. And we happen to have somebody in there who's looking to take over a family business. And just this morning, I read about Jack Welch. The most critical mistake he made in life was his replacement.
I picked the wrong guy.
Yeah.
He had a good chance to pick the right guy.
Talk about the transition stuff and how that relates in a communication world.
Sure. Gen 1 to Gen 2 is pretty easy because, like in the case of my family and my brothers, we all grew up in the same household. I knew how well they worked. I knew how they thought. I knew their abilities. My mother wanted us to think like employees. So when we got our Social Security cards at the age of 12, we started paying into Social Security because we had to punch the time clock. I mean, you probably noticed I didn't call Joyce and Bill mom and dad because at work they weren't mom and dad, they were Joyce and Bill because we were helper, we were work. So we had a competitive advantage because we all grew up with the same values and work ethic. The next generation now, so we'll have cousins that'll end up in the business. And right now, we have two cousins or two of my nieces that are onboarding. In both cases, they went out and got prior work experience. And like Lauren is on our real estate team. She's actually just joining us right now, but she was the vice president of a national mortgage banking firm. She had gone to Creighton University, was a volleyball player, and worked her way up. She's the highest ranking woman in that firm. And so I'm really excited because now I can directly mentor Lauren and it'll be hands-on. Betsy runs our HR and our marketing department. She started out in the career planning at First National Bank of Omaha. So she went through their executive training program and lots of skills. And so the mentality is that we really want to have prior work experience because then they can bring value to us when they come back. We want them all to come back. So that's the other objective. My daughters, I have 3 girls and they're all in college. They just got home yesterday from school. 2 of them go to Stanford and one goes to Cal Polytech out in California. But one's an engineer, one's an architect, and so they're poised if they're interested to come back. They love Nebraska, so I think there's a really good chance they will come back. It'll probably be more a function of what experience and what life experiences they have, and if they meet a boy and the boy doesn't want to come to Nebraska, there may be a challenge there. But I think we have a good chance, mostly because like when Nebraska volleyball played Stanford this year, I asked my daughters, they were still here because they're on the quarter system, so they went to school late and we were here for the volleyball game. I said, what are you going to wear? They're huge Nebraska fans and they're huge Stanford fans. They have 2 friends that play on the Stanford volleyball team. So what are you going to wear? And they looked at me like I was crazy. They said, Dad, of course, we're wearing Husker red. So I think, it's one of those things that as a parent, I encourage you as you start your business career, find a mentor, talk to them, ask them what's made a difference in their career. And as you become parents, talk to others and say, give me 2 hints of the best things you did as a parent. And ask your own parents, what are the best things that you think you did in my upbringing? And then it'll maybe correlate or not correlate with what you think. But I did that a number of times. And, there's so much wisdom around us. We just need to be curious and inquisitive. And, my hope for all of you is that you can find something that you're passionate about. Because if you're passionate about it, you'll go to work every day and it's going to be fun.
More questions? Well, I want to thank you.
Well,
I have 5 E's that relate to this. I wrote down as I watched him give his presentation. Emotion. Did you sense the emotion that he has? He's emotional about the city. He's emotional about his business and his family. Eye contact. I preach to these guys, look at your audience because they look at the monitor or they look at their notes, but eye contact, you did a great job. I'll give you an A+ on your presentation.
thank you.
Enthusiasm. Some of you stand up here and just are not, there's just no enthusiasm coming out of you. But Clay was very enthusiastic. Of course, he's talking about his family business, but get enthusiastic. I guess I said 5 E's, but there are 4. And expertise. He knew his topic. Sure, he knows it because he lives it every day. And he's lived it since 5, 6 years old or whatever. But get enthusiastic about whatever it is you're up here telling people about, whether it's in front of this classroom or in front of a board or someplace where you're working in the future. Thank you very much. Just give him a round of applause. I really
Enjoying your time in Wesleyan, I envy you because this is such a great place to be and have a great.
It's a great institution. Thank you. Yeah, and your
Take my coffee to
your
go.
lukewarm coffee has gotten cold. And I will stop the screen sharing. And also I'm going to stop the recording.
You need the race version.
Thank you for coming.